Who made you laugh like that? Adrian Voss's voice cut through the noise of the entire ballroom. Helena turned. Every person in the room went still. His jaw was tight. His eyes were locked on her face, not with anger, not with threat, but with something far more dangerous. Pain. I've sat across from you for 3 years, he said low and controlled. 3 years, Elena, and I have never not once heard you laugh like that. He didn't look at Nathan Carter. He only looked at her. Why? If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel, follow every part to the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. 3 years. That was how long Elena Marconi had been the only person in New York City who could look Adrian Voss in the eye without flinching. 3 years of working alongside the most feared man in the city. 3 years of watching everyone around him bow, deflect, agree, and disappear when his moods shifted. 3 years of being the one person who never did any of those things. And in all that time, through late nights, reviewing event layouts, through tense phone calls that interrupted her dinners, through his cold moods and his darker silences, Elena had never once allowed herself to forget who he was. Adrian Voss was not a man you fell apart in front of. He was not a man who rewarded softness. He was not a man who made you feel safe enough to laugh without thinking. Elena had built her career on professionalism and precision. She was the best private event designer in Manhattan, the woman wealthy clients called when they wanted something flawless. She had designed galas for senators' birthday celebrations for tech billionaires, fundraising dinners for families whose last names were carved into the side of buildings. She was good at reading rooms. She was good at reading people. And from the very first evening she had been hired to manage an event for the Voss Foundation, she had read Adrian Voss clearly. He was a man who commanded every room he entered. A man who controlled businesses across the city, legitimate ones that sat neatly on paper, and others that only certain people knew about and no one spoke of openly. A man whose name made rivals go quiet at the mention of it. A man who did not smile, did not trust, did not allow anyone past the wall he had built so many years ago that even he had forgotten there was a wall. Except Elena had seen it. Not immediately, not in the first months, but slowly over the course of working closely together, she had seen the edges of the real man underneath. And somewhere along the way, without planning it, without wanting it, she had become someone he actually needed. She told him the truth when everyone else told him what he wanted to hear. She pushed back on his decisions when they were wrong. She walked into his office during the worst days and didn't pretend the tension wasn't there. She was not in love with him. She kept telling herself that. She was not in love with a man like Adrian Voss. She was simply honest with him, and he respected that. And somewhere in that honesty, they had built something. She had no name for, a connection that wasn't romantic, wasn't entirely professional, and wasn't something she could explain to anyone without it sounding far more complicated than it needed to be. That was what she told herself. The Voss Foundation Charity Gala was the biggest event Elena had managed all year. 6 months of planning, hundreds of moving parts, guest lists that required delicate political balancing. A venue that had to be transformed from a stunning, empty warehouse into something that looked like old money had been living there for decades. Elena had poured everything into it, and by the evening of the event itself, it was perfect. She stood near the back of the main hall as guests began arriving, watching her work come together the way a painter watches someone walk into a gallery. Quiet, pride, visible relief, and the constant fear that someone was about to knock something over. She had her earpiece in, her tablet in her hand, her team moving in coordinated silence through every corner of the room. She was completely in her element. That was when Nathan Carter found her. She had worked with Nathan for about 6 weeks on the architectural feature installations for the gala custom-built display structures that told the story of the Voss Foundation's impact through design. He was young, maybe 32, with dark hair that never quite stayed in place, and a habit of talking with his hands when he got excited about something. He was genuinely talented. He was also genuinely easy to be around, which was not something Elena said about many people she worked with professionally. "The east wall installation is holding," he said, appearing beside her with a glass of water he handed to her without asking, because he had noticed she never stopped long enough to get one herself. The lighting team adjusted the angle on panel 3. Looks better. Elena took the water. Good. What about the ceiling rigging on the north side? Checked it twice. Solid. He glanced around the room. Elena, this place looks incredible. Like, genuinely. I've done a lot of event installations, and I've never seen a room put together this well. Don't compliment me until the night is over, she said. Why? Because something always goes wrong in the last hour. He laughed. That's the most pessimistic professional philosophy I've ever heard. It's not pessimism, it's preparation. Okay, but what if nothing goes wrong? She finally glanced at him. Then I'll be pleasantly surprised and mildly suspicious. Nathan laughed again, and then he said something that she didn't fully expect. Can I tell you something completely stupid that happened to me this week? She raised an eyebrow. During the installation. No, nothing related to work. It's just, I don't know. I feel like you need to hear something ridiculous right now, because you look like you've been holding your breath for 6 months, and you might actually pass out if you don't exhale. She almost told him she was fine. Instead, she said, okay, tell me. And he did. It was a story about a parking garage and a misunderstanding involving his neighbor's identical car, and an extremely confused parking attendant, and a ticket he could not legally contest, because the details were too embarrassing to repeat to anyone in authority. By the time he reached the part about trying to explain the situation to his building's front desk manager, at 11:30 at night, Elena had started smiling. By the time he finished the story, she was laughing. Not a polite, contained, professional smile. A real laugh. The kind that surprised her on the way out, bright and sudden, and completely unguarded, the kind she couldn't pull back even when she tried. She pressed her fingers over her mouth. She tried to stop. She couldn't. Nathan was grinning like he had just won something. There it is, he said. That story was ridiculous. Completely true, though. That makes it worse. She was still smiling when she turned, and the smile disappeared. Because Adrian Voss had arrived, and he was looking directly at her. She had seen Adrian walk into hundreds of rooms. She knew the way every room changed when he entered. The slight adjustment in posture from the people who recognized him. The small calculations happening behind polished smiles. The way conversations shifted and realigned without anyone acknowledging it out loud. Adrian had a presence that was not performance. It was simply him. But tonight, for the first time, Elena noticed something different. He wasn't scanning the room the way he usually did. He wasn't greeting the guests closest to the entrance. He wasn't shaking hands or moving toward his usual position near the center of the space. He was standing completely still, and he was looking at her. Not at the room she had built, not at the crowd that had gathered, not at the night he had spent 6 months funding. At her. She saw his face change just slightly, and she didn't know how to read it. She had learned to read Adrian's face over 3 years. She knew the controlled blankness that meant he was evaluating a threat. She knew the flat patience that meant he was about to make a decision someone wasn't going to like. She knew the rare brief warmth that appeared when something genuinely surprised him in a good way. This was none of those. This was something she didn't have a name for. And then it was gone. His expression settled back into the composed authority she was used to, and he began moving through the room the way he always did. Measured, deliberate, making every greeting look like it was entirely on his terms. Elena exhaled. Friend of yours? Nathan asked beside her, his voice careful in a way it hadn't been a moment ago. My client, she said. Right. He didn't say anything else. She didn't explain further. But something had shifted in the air of the room, and she felt it, and she didn't fully understand why. The next 40 minutes moved the way large events always did, controlled chaos that looked like elegance from the outside. Elena was everywhere. A guest had a seating conflict that required quiet renegotiation. The kitchen timing on the first course was running 7 minutes behind. A speaker's microphone developed a low feedback hum that needed immediate attention. She handled all of it without breaking her professional composure, because that was what she did. That was who she was in these rooms, calm and precise and completely focused. And then Adrian appeared at her shoulder. She hadn't seen him cross the room. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. It never was with Adrian. But 3 years of working together had taught her how to handle that too. "I have 6 things I'm currently managing. Your team can handle 6 things. I need 2 minutes." She handed her tablet to Marcus, her assistant, with a look that communicated everything, and followed Adrian through a side corridor off the main hall. He stopped when they reached a quieter space away from the crowd. He turned to face her. "Who is that man?" he asked. She didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "Nathan Carter. He's the architect on the installation project. I've mentioned him." "You've mentioned this project. You haven't mentioned him specifically." "He's a contractor, Adrian. He's not relevant to your guest list." Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He made you laugh." She blinked. "What?" "I watched you from across the room. You were laughing." She stared at him for a moment. "Yes, he told me something funny." "I've never heard you laugh like that." The words landed differently than she expected. She had prepared over the years for many versions of Adrian, demanding cold, calculating occasionally, and surprisingly generous. She had not prepared for this version. The one that stood in front of her and said something that sounded less like a complaint and more like a confession. "Adrian." She kept her voice even. "I have a room full of guests and approximately 5 minutes before the program begins. What do you need?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Nothing," he said finally. "Go." She went. But she felt his eyes on her back the entire way through the corridor. The program moved beautifully. Elena watched from the edges as each element landed the way it was designed to the speaker, remarks the foundation video, the live music, the transition into the dinner service. She had built this night to feel effortless, and it did. She should have felt satisfied. She did feel satisfied, but she was also aware in a way she couldn't quite shut off of exactly where Adrian was in the room at every moment of the evening. She wasn't watching him on purpose, she just knew. The way you know when someone's attention hasn't left you. At one point across the room, she made eye contact with him briefly. He was mid-conversation with 2 other men, both of whom were clearly competing for his focus, and he wasn't fully giving it to them. She looked away first. She went back to work. Nathan found her again an hour later, near the end of the dinner service, checking on the installation lighting with one of her team members. "Everything holding?" she asked. "Perfect. The lighting adjustments look even better now that the room is full." He fell into step beside her. "How are you doing?" "You've been running since doors opened." "That's the job." "Right, but you're also allowed to be a human being occasionally." He smiled. "How's the breathing?" "The breathing is fine, Nathan." "You're sure because you looked a little—" "I'm fine." He held up both hands in surrender, grinning. "Okay, fine, just checking." She shook her head, but she was almost smiling again. "You should eat something," he said. "I'll eat after cleanup." "That's going to be midnight." "Probably." "Elena." "Nathan." She stopped and looked at him. "I appreciate the concern. I genuinely do. But I will survive the evening without dinner, I promise." He studied her for a moment. "Okay, but after this project wraps, I'm taking you to this place in the West Village that has the best late-night food in the city. Non-negotiable." She opened her mouth to say something professional and deflecting. And then she caught Adrian's eyes across the room again. He was watching. Not casually. Not in the general way someone watches a room. He was watching specifically. Her and Nathan, and the small distance between them that was probably completely unremarkable to everyone else in the room. She felt something strange happen in her chest. "I'll think about it," she told Nathan, and moved back toward the event floor. The evening wound down the way all good events did, slowly, gracefully, with guests departing in waves, and the room breathing a quiet relief as the pressure released. Elena's team had begun quiet teardown on the peripheral installations, while guests were still present in visible work, the kind no one notices because it's designed that way. She was reviewing the final logistics on her tablet when she heard footsteps she recognized without looking up. "The event was excellent," Adrian said. "Thank you." She kept her eyes on her tablet. "Your team's guest list was well behaved, which helps." "Elena." She looked up. I was standing very close, not inappropriately, so but close in the way he got when he wanted her full attention and wasn't going to wait for it. I have a question, he said. Okay. How long have you been unhappy? The question hit her like cold water. She kept her face neutral with significant effort. I'm not unhappy. Then why is tonight the first time in months I've seen you genuinely relax in front of someone? She didn't answer immediately. He pressed forward, his voice lower. I'm not asking because of him. I'm asking because of you. Because I know you, Elena, and something is different tonight, and I need to understand what I've been missing. She set the tablet down slowly. She looked at him carefully, and then she said something she had not planned to say. You've been missing the fact that you stopped making room for me. The silence between them stretched. What does that mean? It means that for the last year, every conversation we have is about your needs, your schedule, your events, your problems. She held his gaze. You ask me how things are going the same way you ask your assistant how the morning calendar looks. You stopped asking me things that mattered. Adrian was very still. I didn't realize. I know you didn't, she said. That's the problem. She picked up her tablet again. I have work to finish. We can talk about this another time if you want to. But right now, Adrian, I need to do my job. He stepped back. She watched him let her go, and in his expression for just a moment, she saw something she had never seen on the face of the most feared man in New York. He looked lost. She didn't leave the venue until almost 1 in the morning. Her team had done magnificent work. The space was cleared, the installations broken down safely, the vendors paid and dismissed the client, feedback logged and sent. She was the last one out the way she always was. She sat in the back of her car, in the quiet, after the event. The city moving past the windows, in the familiar blur of late-night Manhattan, and she let herself feel the exhaustion she hadn't allowed herself to feel all day. She was tired. She was satisfied. She was unsettled in a way she couldn't name. Her phone lit up on the seat beside her. A message from an unsaved number she didn't need to look up. I didn't realize I had stopped making room. She stared at the message for a long time. She didn't reply, but she read it 3 more times before she put the phone face down and looked out the window. Because Adrian Voss had never in 3 years sent her a message that sounded like an apology, and she didn't know what to do with the fact that she was not entirely sure it felt like enough. 3 days after the gala, her phone rang at 7:15 in the morning. She was halfway through her first cup of coffee standing at her kitchen counter, reviewing her project calendar for the week when she saw his name on the screen. She answered. Good morning, Adrian said. Good morning. She set the coffee down. Is something wrong? No. A pause. I'm having breakfast delivered to your office. She waited. Why? Because you didn't eat at the event. She stared at the counter in front of her. Adrian, you don't need to. I'm also going to need you to walk me through the vendor contracts for the spring gala. But breakfast first. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'll be there in an hour, she said. She picked up her coffee. She stood very still for a moment, and she noticed with considerable unease that she was smiling. I was already at her office when she arrived, not waiting outside. Inside at the small conference table in the corner of her workspace, with coffee from the good place on 5th Avenue, and enough food for 4 people. Her assistant Priya gave her a wide-eyed look from across the room that communicated several things simultaneously. Elena ignored all of them and sat down across from Adrian. You know you could have scheduled this through normal channels, she said. I could have, but you didn't. No. She looked at him. He looked back at her. You want to talk about the other night, she said. No, he said. I want to have breakfast with you. We can talk about the other night after. She considered this. She picked up the coffee cup. Fine, she said. How do you take your eggs? Something moved through his expression, brief, unguarded, almost startled. Scrambled, he said. Me too. She reached for the containers. Then let's eat. The morning passed in a way that felt entirely different from the last several months of mornings she had spent with Adrian. He was present. Not in the way he was present at events-focused strategic performing the version of himself the world expected, but actually present in the way she remembered from the early days when they were still figuring each other out. He listened when she talked about the spring gala concepts. He asked questions that went beyond logistics. At one point, when she described a design idea she was nervous about presenting to the full team, he said, "It's the most interesting concept you've pitched in a year. Why are you nervous about it?" She looked at him. "Because it's different. Different is the only thing worth doing." She studied him for a moment. "Since when do you say things like that?" "I said things like that when we first started working together." "You did," she admitted. "And then you stopped." He held her gaze. "I know." There it was again, that thing she couldn't quite categorize. Accountability. From a man who never offered it to anyone. She looked away first. "The spring gala concept will need board approval," she said, pulling them back to safe ground. "I'll need your support in that meeting." "You'll have it," he said. She wrote a note in her planner. She didn't look back up for a moment, because she needed the time to remember who he was, and who she was, and the very important distance between those two things. Nathan called her that afternoon. "How are you surviving post-gala?" he asked. "I always imagine event designers spend the week after a big event just lying on the floor." "Lying on the floor is phase 2, she said. "Phase 1 is reviewing everything that almost went wrong." He laughed. "That sounds like the saddest vacation I've ever heard of." "It is. What's up, Nathan?" "I wanted to check in on the timeline for the spring installation planning. I have 2 other projects starting up, but I want to make sure I've blocked the right weeks for you." "Send me your availability calendar. I'll cross-reference with the gala schedule." "Done." A pause. "Also the West Village place. I wasn't kidding. Are you free Saturday?" Elena was quiet for a moment. Saturday. She thought about Adrian's face across the room at the gala. She thought about the message she hadn't answered. She thought about this morning, and scrambled eggs, and the way he had listened. "Saturday works," she said. "Great." Nathan sounded genuinely pleased. 8 o'clock. 8 is fine. She hung up. She sat with that decision for a long moment. Because she was not doing anything wrong. She was having dinner with a colleague. She was allowed to have dinner with a colleague. She was allowed to laugh. She was allowed to be around people who made her feel light. She told herself all of these things very clearly and deliberately, and she believed every single one of them. And she was still sitting there 5 minutes later thinking about the look on Adrian Voss's face when he had seen her laughing, that flash of something raw and unguarded that she had never seen on him before. And she couldn't decide if it scared her more because it was unexpected, or because deep down she had wanted to see it for longer than she was willing to admit. She set the phone face down on the desk. Outside the window, Manhattan moved through the afternoon without her. And somewhere across the city, in an office that overlooked the skyline, from a height most people never reached, Adrian Voss sat at his desk and stared at a message she had not answered. 3 years. He had been so certain of 3 years. And in one evening without warning, he had understood something he couldn't unfeel. He was losing her. Not to another man. To himself. To the version of himself he had become when he stopped paying attention. He put his phone down. He looked at the city below him. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Adrian Voss, the man who had never in his life been afraid of losing anything, felt afraid. He didn't sleep that night. Adrian Voss, the man who had trained himself over decades to sleep efficiently, to rest without guilt, to treat his body like a machine that required maintenance, and nothing more, lay awake in the dark, and thought about a laugh he had never heard before. Not the laugh itself. Not Nathan Carter. Not any of the details of the evening that his mind kept assembling and reassembling the way it processed threats. He thought about the question he couldn't stop asking himself. When had he stopped making her laugh? When had he stopped trying? I didn't have an answer. And that was the thing that kept him awake longer than anything else. Not the jealousy, not the anger, not the unfamiliar tightening in his chest when he had watched her cover her mouth and try to pull back a smile she couldn't contain. What kept him awake was the realization that he could not pinpoint the moment things had changed, which meant the change had happened so gradually he hadn't noticed it at all. That was not something Adrian Voss was supposed to miss. He noticed everything. He had built his entire life on noticing everything, and he had missed this. He was up before 5. He was at his desk before 6. By 7, he had reviewed 3 contracts, made 2 calls to overseas contacts, and sent a breakfast order to Elena's office, because it was the only concrete thing he could think of that might begin to address a problem he didn't yet fully understand. Marcus, his head of operations, noticed the shift within 24 hours. "You've restructured your afternoon calendar 3 days in a row," Marcus said, setting a file on the desk without being invited to sit. "I'm aware. The meetings you've moved 2 of them were with Ricci's people. They're not going to be patient about rescheduling." "Then tell them to be patient anyway." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He had worked for Adrian for 7 years, which meant he had developed a particular skill for reading silences. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine." "Because you've also—" "Marcus." Adrian looked up. "Is there something on fire?" "No." "Then we're done with this conversation." Marcus picked up the file and left. Adrian turned back to the window. He pulled up Elena's contact on his phone, stared at the unanswered message from 2 nights ago, and made a decision he had not made in years. He was going to fix this. I didn't know exactly how. He didn't have a strategy yet, which was deeply uncomfortable for a man who approached every significant situation with 3 backup plans and a clear exit route. But he knew the first step. He had to stop treating Elena Marconi like something he already had. Because he was beginning to understand with a clarity that arrived too late and hit too hard that he had never actually had her at all. She had simply chosen to stay, and he had confused her choice for permanence. Those were 2 very different things. He put the phone down. He picked up the contract in front of him. He read the same paragraph 4 times without absorbing a single word. He put the contract down. He pulled up her number again. He typed, "Are you free Thursday evening?" He stared at it. He deleted it. He typed, "I want to take you to dinner, not to talk about work." He stared at that longer. I deleted it too. He set the phone face down on the desk and pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed. He was Adrian Voss. He did not fumble over messages. He did not edit himself into paralysis. He picked the phone back up. He typed, "Thank you for last night. The event was everything it was supposed to be. You're exceptional at what you do." He sent it before he could second-guess it. He waited. Her reply came 6 minutes later. "Thank you." The foundation team was well prepared. It made the job easier. Professional. Warm but measured. Exactly the way she answered when she was keeping her distance. He stared at the message. He typed back, "That's not why I said it." Another pause. Longer this time. "I know," she replied. "Adrian, I have a client call in 10 minutes. Can we talk later this week?" "Yes," he said. "Whenever works for you." He set the phone down. He sat with the discomfort of being the one waiting for once, of being on the other side of the patience he had always expected from everyone around him. It was not a comfortable place. He decided to stay in it anyway, because she was worth the discomfort, and he had spent 3 years being the opposite of uncomfortable, which had apparently gotten him exactly here. The week moved around him differently than usual. He cleared 2 evenings he would normally have filled with dinners and meetings that reinforced alliances and demonstrated presence. He told Marcus to push anything non-critical. He spent those evenings doing something he had nearly forgotten how to do. He thought. Not about business. Not about threats or strategy or the complicated landscape of running an operation that existed in the space between legitimate and otherwise. He thought about himself. About the person he had been when Elena first walked into a room he controlled and looked at him without adjusting herself to fit the space he occupied. He remembered what it felt like to be surprised by her. He remembered the first time she had challenged one of his decisions in front of his own team. Not aggressively, not to undermine him, but simply because she was right, and she knew it, and she didn't let the power differential stop her from saying so. He remembered thinking, "Who is this woman?" And then slowly, "Over months, I need this woman in my life." Not romantically. Not at first. Just he needed the version of himself that existed when she was in the room. The version that was slightly less controlled, slightly more honest. The version that occasionally surprised himself. He had let that version of himself disappear. He had gotten comfortable. He had taken the one relationship in his life that asked something real of him and turned it into a routine. He had done what he always eventually did. He had managed it. And Elena Marconi was not something that survived being managed. He knew that now. The question was whether he had understood it in time. On Thursday afternoon, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. He answered, "Mr. Voss." The voice was calm male, slightly formal. "My name is Nathan Carter. I'm the architect working on the Voss Foundation installation project with Elena Marconi's team. I apologize for contacting you directly. I got this number through the Foundation's main office." Adrian was very still. "What do you need, Mr. Carter?" "I wanted to flag a structural concern on the permanent installation we're planning for the Foundation headquarters. It's not urgent, but it should be addressed before the design is finalized. I tried to route it through Elena, but she's in back-to-back calls today, and I didn't want to hold up the timeline." Adrian said nothing for a moment. Nathan Carter's voice was steady, professional, completely without guile. "Send the technical brief to Marcus at the main office," Adrian said. "He'll forward it appropriately. Of course. Thank you for your time, Mr. Voss." "Mr. Carter." "Yes. How is the project going from your perspective?" A brief pause, as if Nathan hadn't expected the question. "Really well. Elena runs an exceptional team. The concepts she's developed for the space are genuinely impressive." Adrian absorbed that. "Good, thank you." He ended the call. He sat with it for a long moment. Nathan Carter had called him about a structural concern and mentioned Elena's name with the same natural ease he'd used talking about any colleague. There was no performance in it, no territorial edge, no awareness of any subtext at all. The man was simply doing his job, and he apparently thought Elena was exceptional, which she was. Adrian knew that better than anyone. The difference was that Nathan had said it out loud, apparently without effort, in a 3-minute phone call. Adrian couldn't remember the last time he had said it to her directly. He thought about it. He genuinely could not remember. He pushed back from the desk. He walked to the window. He stood there looking at the city he had spent his entire life building, power in the skyline he could trace from memory, the network of streets and relationships and leverage points that he understood better than almost any other living person, and he felt standing there like he was 17 years old and completely out of his depth. Because power had never once prepared him for this. Boardrooms he knew. Negotiating tables he knew. The long, silent standoff with an adversary who was deciding whether to fold or fight, he knew that with his entire body. He did not know how to be the man standing in his own office, realizing that the woman who mattered most to him had been slowly, quietly walking toward a door he hadn't noticed was open. He picked up his phone. He called Elena directly. She answered on the second ring. "Adrian, I need to say something to you," he said. "And I need you to let me say it without interrupting." A pause. "Okay. I have been treating you like a fixture." He said it flat and direct because he didn't know how to be anything else. "Not because I don't value you, because I do more than you know, but because somewhere in the last year I started assuming you would always be there, and I stopped asking whether you wanted to be." Silence. "Elena, I'm here," she said quietly. "Keep going." "That's it. That's what I wanted to say." He exhaled. "I know one conversation doesn't fix it. I'm not asking you to pretend it does. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that I see it." Another silence. Longer. "Adrian," she said finally. "Yes. That might be the most honest thing you've ever said to me. It might be." "It's a start," she said. He felt something release in his chest. Not relief, not yet. Something smaller than that, but real. "That's enough for right now." "I have a meeting in 5 minutes," she said. "I know. Go." She hung up. He stood there for a moment. Then he went back to his desk. He picked up the contract he hadn't been able to read. This time he read it. That Friday his sister called. Camille Voss was 4 years younger, significantly more emotionally intelligent, and the only person alive who talked to Adrian with less filter than Elena did. She called from her home in Chicago and opened with no preamble whatsoever. "What is happening with you?" she said. "Hello to you too. Marcus called me. Marcus needs to find a hobby. He's worried. And before you tell me he's being dramatic, Marcus does not do dramatic. He does facts. And the facts he gave me are that you've cleared your schedule twice this week. You've been sitting in your office instead of taking meetings, and apparently you sent Elena Marconi breakfast." Adrian said nothing. "Adrian. She didn't eat at the event." "She didn't?" Camille stopped. Then, Oh, this is about Elena." "Camille, it's finally about Elena." "That's not—" "How long?" she said. "I don't know what you're asking. How long have you been in love with her?" The word landed in the space between them and didn't move. Adrian looked at the wall. "I'm not having this conversation," he said. "You called her. You sent her breakfast. You cleared your schedule. I'm addressing a problem in a professional relationship that I neglected." Adrian Michael Voss. "Camille, you don't clear your schedule for professional relationships. You don't send breakfast. You don't call people directly and tell them you've been treating them like a fixture." Her voice was quieter now, the teasing gone, something warmer underneath. "You do those things for people you can't afford to lose." He was quiet for a long moment. "Something happened," he said finally. "Tell me." He told her about the gala, about the laugh, about the stillness he'd felt watching Elena turn toward Nathan Carter, like the sun following a window. Camille listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How did it make you feel?" "Actually feel. Don't give me the strategy version." He exhaled slowly. "Like I was watching someone I should have held on to and realizing I'd been holding on to the wrong things." Camille made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "She's not in love with this Nathan person," she said. "That's not what you're describing." "No. But she might be in love with the idea of someone who sees her." Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "Yes," he said. "Then be that person." Camille's voice was simple, direct, the way she always was when the performance fell away. "Not because you're afraid of losing her, because she deserves it, and because little brother, so do you." He didn't answer right away. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I know." She didn't soften it. "But you know how to learn. You've learned harder things." They stayed on the line for another few minutes, talking about easier things, her kids, the holiday plans. She was already panicking over the way Chicago in November felt like the city was arguing with the weather personally. When they hung up, Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not clarity exactly, but direction. That evening, he called his personal driver and gave him an address he had only been to once before, a late delivery he'd arranged months ago to Elena's office building that he'd never mentioned. He didn't go inside. He had the driver stop half a block away while he thought. He wasn't going to show up unannounced. That wasn't the move. He had her number. He had her attention tentatively. He had her honesty, which was the most valuable thing she'd ever offered him. He needed to be worthy of it. He told the driver to take him home. He spent the evening doing something he genuinely couldn't remember doing in years. He made dinner himself in his own kitchen, poorly with music on, and he ate it standing at the counter. It tasted mediocre. He didn't care. It felt like something a person did. Elena, meanwhile, had her own Thursday. She sat across from Nathan at a small corner restaurant in the West Village at 8 o'clock, exactly with a glass of wine she genuinely needed after the week she'd had. The restaurant was exactly what he'd promised, the kind of place that didn't look like anything from outside and was completely alive once you stepped through the door. Nathan ordered for the table, with the confidence of someone who ate here often and wanted her to trust him, which she did, because she was a good reader of people, and he was exactly what he appeared to be. They talked about the project, They talked about architecture, about how he'd ended up in New York, about a summer he'd spent in Lisbon that had changed the way he thought about public space. He asked her how she'd gotten into event design. She told him the actual story, not the edited professional version, but the real one, involving a job she'd taken out of desperation 6 years ago that had turned into a career she built from scratch. He listened the way people listen when they're genuinely interested. Not performing interest. Actually interested. "You built your entire business in 5 years," he said. "6. I was slow at the beginning." "Elena, that's not slow. Do you understand how rare that is?" She looked at him. "I know the work I put in." "Do you let people tell you that you're impressive?" She laughed a short, surprised sound. "Not usually." "Why not?" She thought about it. "Because I work with people who are impressive in much larger, louder ways. It's easier to stay focused on the work." Nathan tilted his head slightly. "Is that why you let yourself disappear in rooms sometimes?" She went still. "What do you mean?" "I've watched you at the events we've overlapped on. You design something beautiful, something that takes your fingerprints everywhere, and then you spend the night on the edges making sure everything runs, and you never step into the middle of it. You never let anyone look at you the way you let them look at the room." The observation was precise in a way she hadn't expected. She picked up her wine glass, took a careful sip. "The room is the work," she said, "and you're the one who made it." "Nathan." "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable," he said. I notice things, occupational hazard, and I've noticed that you're very good at making other people feel important, and not very good at letting yourself feel the same." She looked at him for a long moment. He was right. She knew he was right. And the uncomfortable thing, the thing that sat in the back of her mind through the rest of dinner, through the walk, back through the easy conversation that continued, and made the evening genuinely one of the nicest she'd had in months, was that she also knew who had contributed most to that pattern. Not Nathan. Not anyone she'd recently met. The pattern had been shaped over 3 years by a relationship that had taught her to be competent and reliable and present, but not to occupy space. Not to need things. Not to bring her whole self into a room where someone else's gravity was so significant it bent the light. She got home just after 11. She sat on her couch and stared at the ceiling for a while. Her phone had 3 messages. One from Priya about a vendor concern. One from her mother. One from Adrian at 9:47. "I hope Thursday was good." She stared at it. He knew she'd been out. She hadn't told him. She typed back, "It was. Thank you." She put the phone down. She picked it back up. She typed, "How did you know?" His reply came immediately, as if he'd been holding the phone. "I didn't. I just hoped your week was better than it started." She read that twice. She put the phone down. She was not going to figure out Adrian Voss tonight. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark. She thought about what Nathan had said. "You're very good at making other people feel important." And then she thought about the call from Adrian 3 days ago, the one where he'd said, "I have been treating you like a fixture." 2 men. One who saw her clearly from the outside. One who was finally maybe too late, maybe not beginning to look. She didn't know which one scared her more. The next morning, Elena arrived at her office to find a single white envelope on her desk with no name on the outside. Inside was a card. No florist's logo, no printed text. Handwritten. She recognized the precise, deliberate penmanship because she had seen it on signed contracts for 3 years. "You've made every room better. I should have said that out loud long before now." She stood holding the card for a long moment. Priya appeared in the doorway. "Do you know who left?" "Yes," Elena said. "Should I?" "No." She set the card down on the desk face up. "Get me the spring gala file. We have a full day." Priya disappeared. Elena sat down. She looked at the card once more. "You've made every room better." She closed the file on top of it. She opened her laptop. She started working. But her hands were not entirely steady. 2 days later, she was at a vendor meeting in Midtown when her phone lit up with a message from a number she recognized as belonging to someone in Adrian's inner circle, his event liaison, not Marcus. someone lower in the structure who communicated the ordinary logistics. The message said, "Mr. Voss would like to arrange a working lunch at the Foundation office this week at your convenience. Please advise your availability." Formal. Through official channels. She stared at it. How was following her lead? She had asked him to communicate through normal channels, and he was doing it, not showing up, unannounced, not calling her directly, not doing any of the things that would have been characteristically Adrian 6 weeks ago, when he wanted something and simply moved toward it without accounting for whether she was ready. He was being careful with her. The realization moved through her in a complicated way she wasn't ready to unpack. She typed back, "Wednesday at noon works." He was waiting when she arrived. Not at the head of the table, at the side of it with the files already open, the lunch already arranged, 2 cups of coffee from the place on Fifth Avenue, because he had apparently made a note of what she drank. "You went through official channels," she said, sitting down. "You asked me to. I didn't think you'd actually do it." He looked at her steadily. "I'm listening, Elena. I know it's new, but I'm listening." She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her. Not capitulation, not forgiveness, not any of the clean, resolved emotions she would have preferred. Something more complicated. Something that felt like possibility. "The spring gala," she said, opening her own files. "Let's start there." "Of course," he said. And they worked. For 2 hours, they worked, talking through concepts and budgets and guest list considerations and design directions, with a rhythm that felt like the early days before things had gotten complicated, before she had realized something was missing. He was engaged. He was listening. He pushed back on 2 ideas she brought in a way that was genuinely useful, not controlling. And he told her the installation concept she'd been nervous about was exactly right, and they should move forward with it immediately. At one point, she made a dry comment about a particularly difficult vendor they'd both dealt with before, and Adrian's mouth curved, not quite a smile but close, and he said something equally dry in return that was so precisely accurate she laughed before she could stop herself. It was a small laugh, nothing like the one at the gala, but it was real. She felt him notice it. She looked back down at her files. "Same time next week?" she asked as the meeting wound down. "Whenever works for you," he said. She stood, gathered her things, got as far as the door. "Adrian?" He looked up. The card was... She stopped, started again. It meant something. He didn't look away. Good. She left. She walked to the elevator with her files against her chest, and her heart doing something she was going to spend the entire cab ride home refusing to examine. Behind her, through the closed conference room door, she heard absolutely nothing, because Adrian Voss had learned in the last 2 weeks how to be still, how to wait, how to want something and not immediately reach for it. It was the hardest thing he had done in years, and he was not close to done. But for the first time in a very long time, he was fighting for something that mattered. Not with power, not with strategy, with himself. And he had a feeling, quiet, unfamiliar, stubborn, that this was only the beginning. The Wednesday lunches became a ritual. Nobody scheduled them officially. Nobody announced them. But by the 3rd week in a row, Mars had quietly begun blocking the noon slot on Adrian's calendar without being asked, and Priya had stopped asking Elena if she needed her afternoon free because she already knew the answer. Something was shifting. Elena felt it the way you feel. A change in weather before it arrives, not in one dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small things. The way Adrian listened now. The way he made eye contact across a conference table and held it not to assert dominance, but to understand her. The way he had stopped finishing her sentences and started asking questions at the end of them instead. He was different. Not entirely. He was still Adrian. Still controlled. Still deliberate, still capable of walking into a room and making every person in it recalibrate. That hadn't changed, and she hadn't expected it to. The core of who he was had not been softened. But something underneath had been rearranged, as if someone had taken all the same pieces and put them back in a different order. She noticed. She was trying not to let it matter too much. That was the part she hadn't figured out yet. Because the problem with Adrian Voss making an effort was that when Adrian Voss decided to do something, he did it completely. He didn't half commit. He didn't test the water. He went in, and watching that full focused attention turn in her direction. After 3 years of being taken for granted, was doing something to her defenses she hadn't anticipated. Nathan noticed too, not because she told him. She hadn't told him anything specific. But Nathan was perceptive in the quiet, architectural way of someone who spent his professional life reading how structures held together, and he had started reading her the same way. "You seem different this week," he said one afternoon when they were reviewing the spring installation revisions at a table in her office. She didn't look up. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like something got resolved. Things are moving well on the project." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." He set his pencil down. "Is it Voss?" She looked up then. Nathan's expression was entirely without accusation. Curious maybe. Careful. "We've had some productive working conversations," she said. "Elena." "Nathan, you don't have to explain anything to me," he said. I'm not in that position, and I know it. I just want to make sure you're okay. That whatever's happening is actually good for you. Not just familiar." The distinction lended with quiet precision. Not just familiar. She looked at him for a moment. "That's a very specific thing to say." "It's a very specific thing I mean." He picked the pencil back up. Familiar and good can look identical from the inside until they don't. She didn't answer. She looked back at the installation plans, but the words stayed with her the same way. His observation about her disappearing in rooms had stayed with her the same way it lodged somewhere she couldn't quite reach and wouldn't quite let go. The Foundation's annual winter gala was 6 weeks out. This was not a charity event. This was the gala, the one on every important calendar in New York, the one that required 6 months of planning, compressed into 8 weeks because the original venue had fallen through, and Elena had performed what her team privately called a miracle in sourcing, negotiating, and redesigning an entirely new event in 43 days. She was running on coffee and momentum, and the particular kind of exhausted focus that serious professionals recognized as their most productive state. Adrian checked in every other day, always through official channels, always measured. He asked questions that were useful and made decisions that made her job easier and kept his opinions to the areas where his knowledge was actually relevant. He was, she realized, deliberately trying not to be in the way. For a man who had spent his entire life being the center of every room he entered, that restraint was not small. She saw it. She appreciated it. She didn't say so yet because she wasn't ready to hand him that much ground. The fourth Wednesday lunch he brought coffee instead of a full meal. "I didn't know if you'd eaten," he said. "I haven't." "Then sit down." He already had food from somewhere good arranged simply. He hadn't made a production of it. They ate and worked simultaneously, the way they had in the early days. Papers spread across the table, conversation, moving back and forth between logistics and something else. Something harder to categorize, the kind of talking that happened in the margins of work when two people had stopped performing for each other. At one point he asked, "What do you do on Sundays?" She looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. "Why? I realized I don't know. I've known you 3 years, and I don't know what your Sundays look like." She set the cup down. "Farmer's market in the morning if it's not raining. Reading in the afternoon. Dinner with my sister, maybe once a month. Terrible television I don't admit to watching." He was quiet for a moment. "What kind?" "Reality shows where people make bad decisions and cry about it." Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile, but was headed in that direction. "You watch other people's dramatic poor choices for relaxation." "It's deeply soothing," she said. "That's the most surprising thing you've ever told me." "You never asked before." The words weren't pointed, they were just true. He absorbed them, the way he had been absorbing all the true things she said lately, without deflecting, without redirecting, without the polished non-response she'd gotten from him for the better part of a year. "What do you do on Sundays?" she asked. "Work usually." "Usually." "Always," he said. "Until recently." She looked at him. "What changed recently?" He met her eyes. I started asking myself whether I was building something worth having or just building. The room was very quiet. She looked back at the files. "Eat your lunch," she said. He did. But he was almost smiling when he did it, and she was very careful not to look. 3 days before the winter gala, everything nearly collapsed. The catering company called at 7 in the morning with a crisis involving a vendor dispute and a union complication that threatened to pull their entire service team from the event. Elena handled it the way she handled every crisis immediately, completely, without broadcasting the alarm to anyone who didn't need to know. By 10 o'clock, she had a replacement solution in place. By noon, the replacement had developed its own secondary problem. By 2. In the afternoon, she was standing in her office with her phone in one hand and a vendor contract in the other, running parallel negotiations with 2 separate companies, while Priya managed a third call on hold. Adrian walked in, unannounced. She held up one finger without looking at him, finished the call, ended it, and turned. "You weren't supposed to be here today," she said. "I heard there was a catering issue." "It's handled." "Your assistant called Marcus." She looked toward Priya's desk. "Priya." Priya held up her hands. "You looked like you needed backup." "I don't need—" Elena stopped, took a breath. "I have it managed." "Tell me what you need," Adrian said. "I need you to not be here adding things to my plate right now." "I'm not here to add things." His voice was level. "I'm here because one of the vendors on your secondary list has a relationship with someone in my network. I can make one call and resolve the timeline issue within the hour." She looked at him. "You know Hendrix Catering," she said. "I know someone who does." "Adrian, I have already." "Elena." Quiet, direct. "Let me help." The room was still. She exhaled. "Fine," she said. "One call, but I need confirmation by 4 o'clock or I'm going with the backup I already have in place." "You'll have it by 3. He stepped out of the office. She turned back to her files. Priya appeared at her elbow. "Should I—" "Don't say anything," Elena said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were about to say something." Priya pressed her lips together and went back to her desk with an expression of tremendous personal restraint. At 2:57, Elena's phone lit up with a message from Adrian. Confirmed. "They'll call you within the next 10 minutes. They called at 2:59. She stood holding her phone after the call ended, looking at the confirmation on her screen, and she felt something move through her chest that was complicated and warm and inconveniently difficult to categorize. She didn't call him. She texted back, "Thank you." His reply, "Always." She put the phone down. She went back to work. She did not examine the word "always" for the rest of the afternoon. She examined it extensively that evening alone on her couch, with a glass of wine, and the kind of honest internal conversation she generally preferred to avoid. The gala was in 3 days. She had a mountain of work between now and then. She was also, she admitted to herself in the quiet of her own apartment, starting to fall. Not fast, not without resistance. Not the way she might have fallen for someone uncomplicated who had simply walked into her life and been straightforwardly kind. This was slower and more reluctant and far more specific, the falling that happened when you already knew someone, when you had already seen the worst and the best of them, when the distance between who they were and who they were capable of being had suddenly collapsed to something you could no longer pretend wasn't there. She was falling for the version of Adrian that had apparently been underneath the whole time, waiting for someone to require it of him. She was also aware, with the clarity that wine and honesty produced together, that this was dangerous. Not because he was who he was. The power, the reputation, the world he occupied that existed in the long shadows of things she didn't ask about directly, but because she had spent 3 years maintaining a careful distance, and she was not sure if she stopped maintaining it that she would be able to find her way back. She needed to be certain this was real, not a performance. Not Adrian Voss executing a strategy called "Get Elena Back" with the same focused energy he applied to everything else. She needed to know the change was genuine. She went to sleep without resolving it. She woke up at 5:30 with the answer to a catering logistics problem that had been nagging at her, and she got up and made coffee and wrote it down, and then spent an hour sitting with the other question, the bigger one, before setting it aside and going to get dressed. There was a gala to finish. The night of the winter gala arrived with the particular energy that major events always carried, a charge in the air that Elena had learned to run on, an acceleration that turned everything slightly brighter and sharper and more significant than it would have been on an ordinary evening. Her team was extraordinary. The venue was extraordinary. Everything she had fought to build in 43 compressed days was standing exactly as it should be, and as the first guests began arriving, and the room filled with the sound of a city's worth of important people occupying a space she had designed, Elena felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that reminded her why she did this work. She was stationed near the east corridor when Adrian arrived. She saw him before he saw her, which was unusual. Adrian entered rooms with the kind of presence that made you look whether you meant to or not. But she was watching for him, which was something she was going to process later. He looked exactly like he always looked at events like this: impeccable, controlled, commanding, without appearing to try. The kind of man every person in the room clocked and recalculated themselves against. Then he found her across the crowd, and something in his face changed the way it had changed at the charity gala, that unguarded flash, but different this time. Warmer, less pained. He made his way toward her without apparent hurry, pausing to greet guests along the way, with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this since before she was managing events. "It's perfect," he said when he reached her. "It's functional," she said. "Elena." "It's perfect," she admitted. He almost smiled. For the next hour, she managed the event from the edges, the way she always did. Nathan was there with his installation team for the early portion of the evening, checking on the structural elements that were incorporated into the venue's design, running quiet verification with his crew before he would hand the space over fully to Elena's control for the remainder of the night. He found her between the main hall and the catering corridor. "Everything's holding beautifully," he said. "The east column installation, I was worried about the lighting angle under event conditions, but it's actually better than the test run." "Good." She glanced toward the main hall. "When does your team clear out?" "Another 30 minutes, maybe 40. He looked at her more carefully. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." "Elena." "Nathan, I'm genuinely fine. Better than fine. The event is running well, and I've slept more than 4 hours for the first time in 2 weeks. He laughed. "That's the bar, 4 hours." "In this industry, yes." He shook his head. "Then, can I say something?" "You're going to say it either way." "Voss hasn't taken his eyes off you all night." She kept her expression neutral. "He's the host. He's managing the room." "He's managing one specific part of the room," Nathan said. "The part you're in." She looked at Nathan directly. His face was open. No jealousy, no accusation. Just the same clear perception he always brought to things. The architectural mind that couldn't stop reading structures, even when the structures were human. "I know," she said quietly. And I don't know yet." He nodded. "Okay." He started to turn, then stopped. "For what it's worth, whatever you decide, you deserve someone who can't stop watching you, whether it's him or anyone else." He held her gaze for a moment. "Just make sure he knows what he's watching." He walked away. She stood there for a moment. Then she went back to work. The program moved beautifully. The speaker remarks, the presentation of the Foundation's annual impact report, the transition into the formal dinner portion. Elena watched it all with the particular dual awareness of the event designer, seeing the room as the guests experienced it, and simultaneously seeing the invisible machinery beneath it. Halfway through the dinner service, the evening developed its first real complication. Not a logistics problem. Something else. A man named Gerald Forsyth. Old money, older opinions. The kind of guest who treated event staff like furniture had made a comment to one of her team members that she heard from across the room. She didn't catch the words, but she saw her team member's face, and she crossed the floor in 12 seconds. By the time she reached them, Forsyth was already redirecting his attention elsewhere, the way men like him always did, moving smoothly from one dismissal to the next, without acknowledging the impact of the first. She checked in quietly with her team member, made sure she was all right, reassigned her to a different section of the room, and turned back toward the main floor. Adrian was standing 5 feet away. He had seen it. "Forsyth," he said. "I handled it," she said. "I know you did." His voice was flat. "That's not what I mean." She looked at him carefully. "Don't," she said. "Elena." "Adrian." Her voice was quiet but firm. "This is my event, my team. I handled it. If you go over there and say something, it becomes about you, and that's not what she needs tonight." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stepped back. "You're right," he said. She blinked. She had prepared for an argument, and he had simply agreed. "That's new," she said before she could stop herself. Something moved in his expression. "I'm working on it." She looked at him for one more moment. Then the earpiece crackled with an update from the kitchen, and she was moving again back into the controlled current of the evening, carrying that exchange with her, like something small and solid in her pocket. The moment that changed everything came at 9:43. She didn't see it building. She was near the stage area, reviewing the program timing for the final remarks when she heard it, or rather when she heard it through the particular acoustic channel of a room that had gone slightly imperceptibly quieter than it should have been. She looked up. Nathan was at the edge of the dance floor, the informal one that had developed naturally as the evening extended, guests shifting from dinner into something more relaxed. He had been about to leave with his team, and he had stopped. He was talking to someone Elena didn't immediately recognize, a woman expensively dressed, whose body language communicated a particular kind of social aggression that Elena had learned to read very early in her career. She heard the woman's voice carry. "Carter, isn't it? I heard about your firm's work on the installation. Tell me, how did you end up working with someone like Voss's event woman? That must be interesting, professionally speaking." The dismissal was sewn into the compliment so neatly most people would have missed it. Nathan hadn't missed it. He looked at the woman with a patience that was not entirely warm. "Elena Marconi is the best event designer in Manhattan. I was glad she brought me in." "Of course," the woman said with a smile that landed wrong. "She does clean work." "She does exceptional work," Nathan said. "Cleanly executed. There's a difference." Elena was not close enough for either of them to know she'd heard, but Adrian was closer, and she watched him make a decision. In real time, she watched him calculate in the span of 3 seconds whether to intervene, and then she watched him not. He turned instead and found her eyes across the room. He crossed to her. "Carter handled it," he said quietly. "I know. I heard. I wanted to go over there. I know that too. But it wasn't my place." She looked at him for a moment. "No, it wasn't." He held her gaze. "I'm learning the difference between protecting you and controlling the room." The words landed in her chest with a weight she hadn't expected. She opened her mouth, closed it. "Adrian." "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I just wanted you to know." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had spent his entire life believing that power over a situation was the same as care for a person who was standing in his own gala, working through the realization that those two things were not identical and that the distinction mattered more than anything else. "Dance with me," she said. She didn't plan it. It came out of her the way honest things did when she stopped managing them simply without rehearsal. I was very still for a moment. Then, "You're working." "I can work and dance." "Your earpiece is on." "Adrian." She held out her hand. "Dance with me." He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. And the most feared man in New York City took her hand without a word and followed her onto the floor. They didn't talk. There wasn't anything that needed to be said, which was rare for two people who communicated in the sharp, precise language of people who valued directness. But this was a different kind of communication, slower, more physical, more honest in some ways than words could be. She was aware of the room adjusting around them. She was aware of people noticing. She was aware in her earpiece of Priya handling 2 simultaneous small situations with complete competence, which meant she was not needed for approximately the next 4 minutes. She let herself be here, just here. His hand at her back was careful, present, but not possessive. I was doing that thing again, the new thing, the restraint that cost him something. She could feel that it cost him. "I should tell you something," he said quietly. She waited. When I saw you laughing at the charity gala. He paused. My first instinct was to go over there and remind you that you were at my event. She pulled back slightly to look at his face. He met her eyes without flinching. That was my first instinct. I didn't do it, but that's what I thought. I know, she said. You know. I know how you think, Adrian. I've watched you think for 3 years. He was quiet for a moment. And now? Now you're telling me instead of acting on it. She held his gaze. That's not small. It doesn't feel like enough. It's a start, she said. The same words she'd used on the phone weeks ago. He recognized them. She could see him recognize them. And something moved through his expression that she didn't have a name for yet, but wasn't afraid of. The song shifted. They stayed on the floor. Camille says I've been in love with you for years, he said. She went very still. She's probably right, he said. I'm not good at seeing those things in myself. Her heart was doing something complicated. Adrian, I'm not asking you for anything, he said quickly. That's not why I told you. I told you because I've been doing this thing lately where I say the true thing instead of the strategic thing, and that was the true thing. She looked at him. The man in front of her, complicated, dangerous, genuinely trying, genuinely afraid in a way he would never have admitted. 6 weeks ago, looked back at her with an expression that was completely and vulnerably open. The most powerful man in the room, and the most exposed. She didn't answer. She stepped slightly closer instead, closing the careful distance he had been maintaining, the respectful distance, the distance that had cost him something every day she could see, and she put her head against his shoulder for the remaining measure of the song. She felt him exhale. She felt in that exhale 3 years of a man deciding whether he was allowed to want something he had been afraid to name. In her earpiece, Priya's voice. Elena, the final remarks are ready to cue in 8 minutes. She stepped back. She smoothed her jacket. She looked at Adrian, who was looking at her with an expression she was going to spend a significant amount of time thinking about later, and she said, I have to go back to work. I know, he said. We need to talk, not tonight. Whenever you're ready, he said. She turned. She walked back into the current of the event. She managed the final 40 minutes of the night with complete professional precision. The remarks, the close, the graceful dissolution of the evening. The vendor sign-offs, the initial teardown coordination. She did all of it. And the entire time, she felt the ghost of his hand at her back. The last guest left at 11:40. Her team moved into full teardown mode. She found Nathan near the installation structures, supervising the careful disassembly of the pieces his team would transport and store. Good night, he said when he saw her. Good night? She hesitated. Nathan, what you said to that woman earlier, about my work. He shrugged. It was true. I know, but you didn't have to. He looked at her with the easy directness she had come to expect from him. I wanted to. That's not the same as having to. He picked up his case. Go home, Elena. You've earned it. She watched him go. Then she turned and looked at the room she had built, emptying, now the way rooms always did at the end of the night, the bones of the event showing through as the decoration came away. And she thought about everything the evening had held. Nathan, who saw her clearly and simply. Adrian, who was learning to. A dance she hadn't planned. A sentence she hadn't expected. Camille says I've been in love with you for years. She thought about the moment on the dance floor, the exhale, the warmth of that careful hand, the fact that he had told her the true thing instead of the strategic thing. She thought about Nathan's words from early in the evening. Make sure he knows what he's watching. She picked up her bag. She walked out into the November air. Her phone lit up as she reached the car. Adrian. Not a message this time, a call. She looked at it for one full ring. She answered. Are you all right? He said. I'm fine. I'm heading home. Good. A pause. The night was Elena, it was extraordinary. What you built in 43 days should not have been possible. It usually isn't, she said. And yet, she agreed. A comfortable silence, the kind she hadn't realized she'd missed until she was back inside one. Adrian, she said. Yes. What you said on the dance floor. I know. We do need to talk. I know that too. Not tonight, she said. Not tonight, he agreed. Soon, she said. I'll be here, he said. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. She got into the car. She leaned her head back. She looked up at the ceiling in the dark. Outside the city kept moving, indifferent, enormous. Alive in the way cities were alive at midnight, electric and restless, and entirely without patience for the small, complicated, enormous things happening inside the people moving through it. Inside the car. Elena Marconi, who had spent 3 years maintaining careful distance, who had built her professional life on precision and control, and the ability to read a room before it read her, allowed herself to feel exactly what she was feeling. Terrified. Hopeful. Completely inconveniently certain. She was not done fighting it. But she was starting to wonder what exactly she was fighting for. She didn't call him Sunday. She had told herself she would think about it over the weekend. Take 2 days, let the dust of the gala settle, let the adrenaline that had been running her for 6 weeks drain away before she made any decisions about anything. That was the plan. Sensible, measured, exactly the kind of deliberate approach she applied to every other significant thing in her life. By Saturday afternoon, she had thought about almost nothing else. She went to the farmer's market in the morning, the way she always did. Walked the same route, bought the same things. Coffee from the corner vendor, bread from the stand she'd been going to for 4 years, flowers, because her apartment needed them, and she needed the ritual. She did all of it, and she came home, and she sat at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold. And she thought about Adrian Voss saying, "Camille says I've been in love with you for years," in the middle of his own gala, like it was something he simply needed her to know. Not a move. Not a strategy. Not the calculated disclosure of a man who understood how to leverage information for maximum effect. Just the truth. She had watched him closely enough for long enough to know the difference. Her sister called at 2 o'clock. Gianna was 3 years older, lived in Brooklyn with her husband and 2 daughters, and had an opinion about Adrian Voss that she had been withholding with visible effort for approximately 2.5 years. "You went to the gala," Gianna said. "How was it?" "It was excellent. The event ran beautifully." Elena. "What? How was it really?" She exhaled slowly. "Complicated." "Did something happen with him?" She stared at the ceiling. "Why do you always assume?" "Because every time something happens in your life that makes your voice do that thing, it's connected to Adrian Voss. This is not a new pattern." A pause. "What happened?" she told her. Not all of it. Not the private things. Not the dance floor. Not the words that had been living in her chest for 48 hours. But enough. The weeks of change. The Wednesday lunches. The card, the phone call, where he had said, "I have been treating you like a fixture." Gianna was quiet for longer than usual when she finished. "What?" Elena said. "I'm waiting to see if there's a version of what you just described where he's not genuinely trying." "There could be." "Elena." Gianna's voice was firm and kind in the specific way of older sisters. "You have been performing detachment for 3 years. You walk into his world, you do extraordinary work. You hold yourself at a precise distance from the one person you've talked about more than anyone else in your adult life, and you call it professional boundaries." It was professional. It was also protection. A beat. You were protecting yourself. Because he was powerful and complicated, and you were afraid that if you let yourself actually feel it, and it went wrong, there'd be no coming back. The silence between them stretched. Elena said nothing. "Am I wrong?" Gianna said. "No," Elena said quietly. "He's showing you something different now. Or he's afraid of losing something he values, and he's doing what he needs to do to keep it." "Those 2 things can both be true," Gianna said. "People change for real reasons that start with fear. The question is whether the change outlasts the fear." Elena looked at the flowers she'd brought home from the market, white simple, the kind that looked like something you'd put in any room, and they'd belong there. "How do I know?" she said. "You don't yet," Gianna said. "But you've been watching this man closely for 3 years. You're not walking in blind. Trust what you've already learned." She stayed on the line with her sister for another 20 minutes, talking about easier things. The girls' an upcoming holiday dinner, whether their mother would finally stop rearranging the furniture in Gianna's house without asking, and when she hung up, she sat for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. She texted Adrian. "Are you free Monday evening?" His reply came in under a minute. "Yes." She typed my office. 7 o'clock. I'll have coffee. "I'll be there," he said. She put the phone down. She felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but the particular calm that arrived when you stopped fighting a decision you'd already made. She was going to walk toward this, with her eyes completely open. That was the only way she knew how to do anything that mattered. Monday arrived with the quiet momentum of a city that never fully stopped. Elena spent the day at her office with genuine focus. The post-gala logistics required attention. Vendor payments needed. Finalizing her team deserved the debrief they had earned, and she gave all of it the concentration it was due. She was good at this. She had always been good at compartmentalizing the professional and the personal, keeping them clean and separate, so neither contaminated the other. By 6 o'clock, her team had gone home. By 6:30, the office was quiet. She made coffee. She straightened the conference table. She stopped straightening it and sat down and told herself to stop performing composure for a room that contained no audience. He knocked at 7 exactly. She had given him the building code months ago, a practical decision at the time since he had needed after-hours access for a document exchange once, and it had simply never been revoked. He had used it precisely one time for that purpose and not again. Tonight he knocked anyway. She opened the door. I was in a dark coat, no tie. A deliberate informality that told her he had thought about this too, that he hadn't come in the full armor of the man he was in boardrooms and galas, but in something closer to the person he was trying to remember how to be. "Come in," she said. He came in. She handed him coffee. He sat across from her at the table, not at the head, not in the position of authority, but across. Level. Equal. She noticed. Of course she noticed. "You wanted to talk," he said. "I have questions," she said. "Ask them." She looked at him directly. "What changed?" "Not the what. Specifically, I've seen the what. I mean the thing that made you decide to change. Was it the gala? Was it seeing Nathan make me laugh? Because if this is about competition—" "It's not about Nathan," he said. "Then what is it about?" He held her gaze. "Watching you laugh that night, my first feeling was jealousy. I won't lie about that, but what came after it when I got home and couldn't sleep, that was something different." He set the coffee cup down. "I asked myself when I had last made you feel like that, like you could be completely unguarded, and I couldn't answer. I kept going back further and further, and I still couldn't find the moment." He exhaled. That wasn't jealousy anymore. That was shame. The word landed between them with a weight that she hadn't expected from him. Shame. Adrian Voss using that word without cushioning it, without redirecting it, without deploying it strategically to generate a specific response, just placing it on the table and letting it sit there. "I didn't know how to be around you the way he was," Adrian continued. "Easy, without agenda. I've spent so long operating in rooms where everything has a purpose that I forgot with you. The purpose was supposed to be you, not the event, not the business. You." She was quiet for a moment. "You built something with me," she said. "Over 3 years. And then you stopped tending it." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at the table, then back at her. "Because I was afraid." She waited. "I don't trust things that matter," he said. "That's not an excuse. It's a history. When something becomes important to me, my first instinct is to contain it, control the exposure, reduce the risk." He met her eyes. "I did that with you. I kept you at exactly the distance where I could have you without having to be completely honest about how much I needed you. Because needing someone that much is for me the most dangerous thing in the world." The room was very quiet. She understood that, more than she wanted to. "I've done the same thing," she said. He looked at her. "I've kept myself at a professional distance for 3 years," she said. "Partly because of who you are and what that would mean. but partly because I knew if I actually let myself feel it, all of it, and it went wrong, I wouldn't have a clean exit. He absorbed that. Elena, I'm not done, she said. I need you to understand what I'm actually afraid of. Not the power, not the world you move in. I've been adjacent to that for 3 years, and I know how to navigate it. She looked at him steadily. What I'm afraid of is becoming someone who disappears inside your gravity. I spent 3 years shrinking myself in rooms where you were present, making myself smaller, more useful, less demanding. And I did it without realizing, which means you didn't do it to me on purpose, but it happened, Adrian. I need you to understand that it happened. His jaw was tight, not with anger, with something else, the look of a man absorbing something that hurt precisely because it was accurate. I know, he said. Do you? Yes. His voice was low. I know because Nathan Carter told you that you disappear in rooms and you couldn't argue with him. And when he said it, something in my chest. He stopped. I did that, not intentionally, but I built the room and you arranged yourself around it, and I told myself that was how things worked, instead of asking if it was how they should. She held his gaze. She was looking for the performance, the calculation. The Adrian she had known in difficult moments, who could construct the appearance of vulnerability with the same precision he applied to everything else. She didn't find it. What she found was a man who looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not with her, not with the conversation with himself. With the inventory of things he had done without examining them closely enough. What do you want? She said. Specifically. Don't give me something elegant. Tell me what you actually want. He didn't look away. I want you in my life in a way that's honest. I want to be the man you feel like yourself around, not the man you manage yourself around. He paused. I want to learn what your Sundays look like. I want to know what you're afraid of that has nothing to do with work. I want you to tell me when I'm wrong, without calculating whether it's worth the effort. He exhaled. I want to stop being the person who made you feel like laughing freely was something you had to save for other people. The silence that followed was long. It was also, Elena realized, not uncomfortable. That was new. This isn't simple, she said. I know. You are not a simple man to be involved with. No, I'm not. He didn't dress it up. My life has complications that don't disappear because I want something different. The world I operate in doesn't reorganize itself around my personal decisions. I can't promise you simple. I'm not asking for simple, she said. I'm asking for honest, that I can do. And I need to be someone in your life, not something, not a role you've allocated a specific function to. She held his gaze. If that changes, if I ever feel like I'm being managed again, I will tell you, and you have to hear it. Not defend yourself, not explain it away. Hear it. Agreed, he said. And if I tell you that you're wrong about something, I will listen. Even if I'm right in front of your people. Something like a smile almost. That will cost me more than the other things. I know. Do it anyway. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, picked up her coffee cup, walked to the window, and looked at the city for a moment. Not to avoid him, to give herself one breath of space before she said the next thing. She turned back. I felt it too, she said. For a long time. I just didn't let myself look at it directly. He stood up. I didn't move toward her. He waited, and that waiting, that deliberate restraint, was perhaps the most significant thing he had done in the entire conversation. Because the old Adrian would have moved, would have closed the distance and made the moment happen on his timeline. This Adrian let her choose. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. She said, "We're going to get things wrong." "Yes," he said. "I'm going to need time to trust this completely. Take whatever you need. And you're going to have to keep showing me, not just tonight, not just this week." "I know that," he said quietly. She reached up and placed her hand against his jaw. A simple, deliberate gesture, the kind that said, "I see you more clearly than any words available to her in that moment." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, she was still looking at him. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated. We try. Carefully. Honestly. She dropped her hand. And if you send me breakfast again, tell me in advance so I know to actually show up hungry. He exhaled a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was the closest thing to one she'd heard from him in months. I can do that, he said. She stepped back. She picked up her coffee. Sit down, she said. I have a question about the spring gala venue that has nothing to do with any of this, and I've been meaning to ask you for 3 days. He sat. She sat. And they talked about the event, and then about other things, and the conversation moved the way conversations did when two people had finally stopped performing at each other, easy and unhurried, and occasionally interrupted by the kind of honesty that arrived without announcement and didn't apologize for showing up. It was close to 10 o'clock when he stood to leave. At the door, he paused. Elena. Yes. Saturday, the farmer's market. He held her gaze. Can I come? She thought about it. Actually thought about it, not the professional calculation, not the risk assessment. Just the honest answer. 7:30, she said. Don't be late. I won't be, he said. He left. She stood in her office for a moment after the door closed. Then she sat down. She opened her laptop. She started working. She was smiling. She stopped trying to stop. The farmer's market arrived with a clear Saturday morning that felt like the city was cooperating with something. Elena was there at 7:20 because she was always early. Adrian arrived at 7:28, which told her he had probably been early too, and spent 2 minutes managing the impulse to be first. She didn't say that. She handed him a coffee from the corner vendor. He looked at it, then at her. You got here first. I always get here first. She started walking. Come on. He fell into step beside her. The market was the version of him she had rarely seen without the armor of his professional context, without a room full of people orienting themselves around his presence. Just a man walking beside her through a Saturday morning crowd, slightly out of his natural element, paying close attention to everything. He asked questions. Not the performative questions of someone trying to appear interested, actual questions, the kind that required actual answers. Why this bread stand and not that one? What she was actually going to make with the vegetables she picked up. Whether the coffee from this specific vendor was objectively better, or whether it was a loyalty thing. Both, she said. How do you know? I tried everywhere else first. This is better. She glanced at him. That's how you know anything. You try the alternatives. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is that a metaphor? She almost smiled. It's about coffee. Right. They stopped at a flower stand. She looked at the options with the focused consideration she brought to everything aesthetic. White, Adrian said. She looked at him. You bought white ones last week, he said. I saw them in your office. She stared at him. You noticed my flowers. I notice everything about you, he said, simply, without drama. Like it was a fact rather than a declaration. I just didn't always say it out loud. She picked up the white ones. She paid. She handed them to him to carry without saying anything about it. He carried them without saying anything either. And in that small, quiet exchange, the flowers, the silence, the easy comfort of two people who had finally stopped pretending not to know each other fully, something settled. Not the ending of anything. The beginning. 3 weeks later, Camille Voss called her brother at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. Marcus told me you've been leaving the office before 8 o'clock, she said. Good morning to you too. Adrian, you have never left the office before 8 in your entire adult life. I'm having dinner at a reasonable hour. With who? A pause. Elena. Camille made a sound that was mostly joy and partially vindication. How is she? Extraordinary, he said. Without hesitation. Without qualification. Camille was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, softer. You sound different, she said. I feel different. Good different. He looked at the window. At the city outside it. At the evening he had coming dinner with Elena at a place she'd picked, which was almost certainly not the kind of restaurant he would have chosen, which he had realized recently was part of the point. Yes, he said. Good different. After he hung up with Camille, he sat for a moment with the straightforward fact of it. He was happy. Not in the way he was satisfied when a business deal closed correctly, or when an event landed flawlessly, or when a long-running problem resolved itself in his favor. Those things were satisfying. They required competence and leverage and the right application of force. This required something he'd had to learn from scratch. He had shown Elena parts of himself that no one else had seen. The boy who had lost his father at 15 and decided somewhere in that loss that needing people was a vulnerability he couldn't afford. The teenager who had built his first network not from ambition, but from the bone-deep belief that protection came from power, and power came from never being caught without options. The man who had assembled an empire and looked at it in certain honest moments and wondered if he'd built it because he wanted it, or because he didn't know how to build anything smaller. He had told her those things. Slowly. Over evenings and Saturday mornings and Wednesday lunches that had stopped being work meetings and started being the best part of his week. She had listened the way she always listened, without rushing him toward a conclusion, without offering him resolution. He hadn't reached himself. She had asked questions that were precise and difficult, and that required him to be honest in ways he hadn't known he'd been avoiding. And she had told him things back. The years before her business had taken off when she had been working triple shifts and telling everyone she was fine because she had been determined not to need anyone to rescue her. The relationship 5 years ago that had ended partly because the man had been wrong for her and partly because she had never actually let him in enough for him to have a fair chance. The way she had walked into the Voss Foundation job, certain she was professional enough, competent enough, armored enough, and found herself over 3 years more tangled in this man's orbit than she'd intended. They had given each other the real versions. And the real versions fit together in a way the professional versions never could have, because the professional versions had been designed to be self-contained. He left the office at 7. He was at her door at 7:20. She opened it before he knocked. She'd heard the elevator, and she was still holding her jacket mid-putting it on, which meant he was slightly earlier than expected. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be." She finished with the jacket. "I'm ready." He held the door. She walked past him. In the elevator she said, "How was your day?" "Long," he said. "Better now." She glanced at him. He was looking straight ahead, but he was almost smiling. She looked straight ahead too. She was doing the same. The restaurant was exactly what he'd expected. Small, warm, loud, in the good way. The kind of place where the tables were close enough together that you had to lean toward the person across from you, which he was beginning to think Elena chose deliberately. They ate. They talked. A couple at the next table had a disagreement that became briefly audible, and then resolved in a way that suggested it was not their first such disagreement and would not be their last, which Elena observed with a quiet amusement he recognized as the woman who watched reality television for relaxation. "You're enjoying that," he said. "I'm not," she said, clearly enjoying it. "You are." She pressed her lips together. "They're going to be fine. She's not actually upset. She's negotiating." He looked at the couple. "How do you know?" "Because she keeps touching his arm while she's talking. You don't touch someone's arm when you're truly angry with them." She looked back at Adrian. "Body language. I've spent 15 years reading rooms." He studied her. "What does my body language tell you right now?" she considered. "That you're more relaxed than you've been in months, that you're paying attention, and that you're still slightly uncomfortable not being the most controlled person at the table." He was quiet for a moment. "Am I the most controlled person at the table?" he asked. She tilted her head. "It's closer than it used to be." He held her gaze, and then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She looked down at it. She turned her hand over. She laced her fingers through his. Neither of them said anything. The couple at the next table reached some kind of resolution, marked by a laugh and a clink of glasses. The evening continued. Outside later walking because the night was clear and neither of them was in a hurry. He said, "Tell me something I don't know about you." She was quiet for a moment. "I almost didn't take the Voss Foundation contract," she said. He looked at her. "I had 2 offers that month." The foundation was bigger, but the other was simpler. Lower stakes. A client who wanted exactly what they asked for, with no complications. She kept her eyes ahead. My gut told me the foundation job was going to be complicated. Was it? She glanced at him. Enormously, she said. He was quiet. Tell me something I don't know about you, she said. He thought about it. The first event the foundation held, he said. Before you were involved, it was a disaster. Wrong venue, wrong logistics, wrong everything. I fired the entire planning team, and I told Marcus to find someone who wouldn't treat it like a transaction. She looked at him. He found you, Adrian said. I looked at your portfolio for 2 minutes and told him to call. He paused. The first time you walked into my office, I had already decided you were the right person. I just needed to see if the person matched the work. Did it? You were more, he said, than I expected. She looked ahead. You never told me that, she said. I never told you most things, he said. I'm working on it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stopped walking. He stopped beside her. She turned to face him, and she looked at him the way she had looked at him across conference tables and event floors for 3 years, with the full force of a woman who missed nothing and excused nothing, and had decided after careful consideration to be exactly here. Adrian, she said. Yes. I'm glad I took the contract. He looked at her, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, not a controlled expression, not the managed composure of a man who had taught himself to reveal nothing. Adrian Voss smiled, a real one, unguarded and unplanned, the kind that arrived before you could decide whether to allow it. She saw it. She had been waiting, she realized, to see it. And it was nothing like she had imagined. It was better. She took his hand. They kept walking. The city moved around them, enormous and indifferent, and entirely unaware of the small, significant thing happening on one of its streets. A man who had spent his entire life believing that love was a liability, learning to hold it like something worth keeping, and a woman who had spent 3 years making herself smaller, finally taking up exactly the space she deserved. They were not finished. There were things ahead of them that would require more honesty, more patience, more of the hard daily work of 2 people trying to build something real inside a complicated life. They both knew that. Neither of them was afraid of it. Not anymore. She didn't sleep the night after the conversation at his apartment. Not because it had gone badly. Not because she was afraid or angry or any of the things that had kept her awake in the weeks before. She didn't sleep because something inside her had finally stopped fighting, and the silence that came after a long battle was its own kind of loudness, unfamiliar, open, slightly terrifying in the way that freedom always was when you'd been holding yourself tightly for too long. She lay in the dark, and she let herself feel it. All of it. The fear that this was too complicated. The certainty that it was real. The memory of his voice when he had said, I don't know how to need people without eventually trying to control them. The rawness of it. The specific particular courage it took for a man like Adrian Voss to say something like that out loud to another person. She thought about what she had said back. Then we figure it out together. Or we don't. But at least we do it honestly. She had meant every word. That was the part that kept her awake. Not doubt. Conviction. By morning, she had made a decision she hadn't fully articulated even to herself, and she carried it with her through the first week of December, like something she was still getting used to holding. She didn't call him immediately, not because she was retreating, but because she needed to understand what she was walking toward before she walked toward it. Elena Marconi had built her entire career on preparation, on knowing the room before she entered it, on understanding the structure before she committed to the design. She was not going to approach the most significant decision of her personal life any differently. She talked to her sister Claire on a Tuesday evening. Claire was 40, a high school art teacher, and the person in Elena's life who had never once allowed her to intellectualize her way past something emotional. You're in love with him, Claire said approximately 4 minutes into the conversation. I didn't say that. You described his face when he said something vulnerable, and you used the word extraordinary. You're in love with him. Elena was quiet. Elena. It's complicated. All love is complicated. That's not a reason, that's a description. Claire's voice was steady. What are you actually afraid of? She thought about it honestly. That I change my life for this, and it turns out I was in love with the idea of who he was becoming, not who he actually is. Okay. And what's the difference? How would you know? I don't. Not yet. So find out. Claire made it sound simple the way she always did, because for Claire the emotional logic was always cleaner than the intellectual version. Stop analyzing the blueprint and walk into the building. Elena laughed despite herself. That's very architectural of you. I've been listening to you talk about Nathan Carter's metaphors for 2 months. It's rubbing off. A pause. But I mean it. You've been standing at the door of this thing long enough. At some point you have to choose. She thought about those words for the rest of the week. She thought about them on Thursday when Adrian sent a single message. Camille is coming to New York for the weekend. She wants to meet you properly. No pressure. I told her it was your decision. She stared at the message. Camille Voss, who had told her brother he'd been in love for years. Who had given him the direction he needed when he was standing in his office, unable to figure out which way was forward. She typed back, Saturday works. What time? His reply came in under a minute. Noon. She'll be thrilled. Fair warning, she's nothing like me. I figured, Elena wrote. That's probably why I said yes. She didn't see his response to that because she put the phone face down and went back to work with the particular efficiency of someone who had just made a decision they were not going to unmake. Saturday arrived with cold, clear air and the kind of New York December light that made everything look deliberate. Camille Voss was nothing like her brother. She was warm, the way Adrian was careful. She laughed quickly, took up space without apology, and made eye contact the way people did when they had decided in advance to like you and were simply waiting to confirm it. She hugged Elena within 30 seconds of meeting her. Adrian, standing slightly behind, made an expression that suggested he had warned Camille about this and had been ignored completely. They had lunch at a small restaurant, not the kind of place Adrian usually occupied, which Elena suspected was deliberate on his part. Something smaller, more human. The kind of place where you could hear the table next to you if you wanted to, and the lighting didn't make everything look like a performance. Camille asked Elena about her work with genuine interest, not the polished social interest of someone filling conversational space, but the real kind. The kind that followed up and remembered details and connected things. Adrian says the spring gala concept you developed is unlike anything the foundation has done before, Camille said. It's a different approach, Elena said. He said it was your idea to center the whole visual narrative on the people served rather than the donors. That's where the story actually lives. Camille looked at Adrian. I like her. I know, he said. Did you know she was this interesting when you hired her? Yes, he said. That was the problem. Camille turned back to Elena with bright eyes. He was terrified of you from the beginning. He just spent 3 years pretending he wasn't. Camille, Adrian said. I'm not wrong. You're also not subtle. I've never claimed to be. She looked at Elena directly. He told me what he said to you. At his place. The whole conversation. A pause. He called me after, and he sounded like a person again for the first time in years. I wanted you to know that. Elena held her gaze. He earned that conversation, Elena said carefully. It didn't happen overnight. No, Camille agreed. It didn't. He worked for it. Her expression was warm, but clear. I just want to make sure from the outside, from someone who loves him, but isn't blind about who he is, that you know what you're working with. He's not finished. He's not fixed. He's just started. I know, Elena said. And I'm not looking for finished, Elena said. I'm looking for honest. Camille looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at her brother. Then she picked up her wine glass. All right, she said. Someone order dessert. I want to hear the story about the catering crisis from her version, because Adrian's version made him sound like a hero, and I don't believe that. Elena laughed. Adrian did not exactly deny it. The afternoon stretched longer than any of them planned, And when Camille finally left, hugging Elena again, squeezing her brother's arm with a pressure that communicated several things simultaneously, she left a different kind of air behind her. Adrian and Elena stood outside on the sidewalk. The city moved around them. "She approves," Adrian said. "I noticed. She doesn't approve of most people." "I gathered." He looked at her. The afternoon light was dropping, the cold sharpening the particular quality of a December evening, beginning to settle over the street. "Can I walk with you?" he asked. "Not let me take you home. Not an instruction dressed as an offer, a question." "Yes," she said. They walked, not toward anywhere specific. Through the neighborhood, into the next one, through the particular rhythm of a city that never stopped. But occasionally in certain pockets felt like it was breathing slowly enough for two people to keep pace with it. They talked, not about work, not about the foundation, or the spring gala, or the vendors, or any of the professional architecture that had framed every conversation between them for 3 years. They talked about other things, childhood neighborhoods, the way both of them had learned to read people before they learned to trust them, the specific loneliness of being the person everyone came to for strength, and never thought to ask if you were all right. At one point she said, "My father left when I was 9. My mother handled it by becoming the most competent person in any room she was ever in. I watched her do that, and I thought that was what strength looked like." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Did it work for her?" "It made her successful," Elena said. "I'm not sure if that's the same thing." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. I was looking straight ahead. "My father didn't leave. He stayed and taught me that caring about something meant knowing how to hold it so tightly it couldn't be taken. I spent 20 years applying that lesson to everything in my life. A beat. Including people." "I know," she said. "I'm unlearning it," he said. "It's slower than I'd like?" "Most real things are." He glanced at her. Something moved through his expression, that same unguarded quality she had been seeing more and more frequently, the one that made him look like the person he was before he had become the person everyone feared. She stopped walking. He stopped with her. "I want to try this," she said. "Properly. Not in the margins of work. Not as something we're managing around everything else." He looked at her steadily. "I know what that means," she continued. "I know who you are. I know the parts of your life I'm going to have to decide what to do with. I'm not pretending those parts don't exist." She held his gaze. "But I also know who you've been showing me you can be, and I want to see if that person is who you actually are." He was very still. "He is," Adrian said. "Then show me." Her voice was steady. "Not in one conversation, not because I'm asking. Just show me, over time, in the small things." "I can do that," he said. "I know you can, that's why I'm saying it." He looked at her for a long moment, the way he looked at things. He was deciding how to hold, except this time without the tightening, without the control, with something that was just careful and honest and real. He reached out and took her hand, not dramatically, not with any of the weight the gesture could have carried. Just took her hand on a December sidewalk in Manhattan, the way a person did when they wanted to be close to someone and had finally stopped being afraid to show it. She let him. They kept walking. The month that followed was not a fairy tale. Elena had never been interested in fairy tales. It was better than that. It was real, which meant it was imperfect and intermittently complicated and occasionally frustrating and more than worth it. There were evenings when Adrian's world pressed against the edges of their time together in ways that required conversations she hadn't anticipated. There were moments when his instinct to manage a situation overrode everything else, and she had to call it out clearly, and the clarity was sometimes uncomfortable for both of them. There was one evening 3 weeks into December when a work crisis pulled him away from something they had planned, and he handled the communication badly, and she told him so, without softening it, and the conversation that followed was not pleasant and was entirely necessary. He listened. He didn't deflect. He came back to the conversation the next morning with an apology that was specific and without excuse, the kind of apology that took accountability without performing it. She accepted it. They moved forward. That was the pattern of it, honest, imperfect, continually forward-moving. Not because either of them was pretending things were simple, but because they had both decided the work was worth doing. Nathan wrapped his portion of the Spring Gala project in the second week of December. He came by Elena's office on his last day to finalize the handover documentation, and they had coffee and talked through the remaining installation timeline with the ease of two people who had worked well together and knew it. At the door, he paused. "I heard things are going well," he said. "With Voss." She looked at him. "From who?" "People talk in this city." He smiled. "I'm glad, Elena. I mean that." "Nathan, I always knew," he said simply. "From pretty early on, you lit up differently when you talked about him, even when you were frustrated." He tilted his head slightly. "Even when you were trying not to." She absorbed that. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't." He picked up his bag. "That's why I never said anything until now." A beat. "You deserve someone who sees you. I hope he keeps seeing you." "I think he's learning to," she said. Nathan nodded. "Then that's exactly enough." He lifted a hand in a small wave. "Call me for the next installation project. You run a good room." He left. She stood in the empty doorway for a moment. Then she went back to her desk. She had a spring gala to build. Christmas came and went differently than any she could remember. Adrian had, in previous years, treated holidays the way he treated most things that weren't strategic priorities, efficiently and at a distance. He sent appropriate gifts to appropriate people. He appeared at the right events. He did not, as far as she could tell, actually experience December as something separate from the rest of the year. This December, he called her on Christmas Eve from his kitchen, where he was making dinner for Camille's family, who had come to New York for the week, and he sounded exasperated and slightly flower-dusted, and more genuinely alive than she had ever heard him. "Camille's oldest has decided to help," he said. "How old is she?" 7. She's very confident." "Is that going well?" "There is flour on the ceiling." Elena sat on her couch and laughed a real laugh, the kind that surprised her on the way out, and on the other end of the phone, she heard him go quiet. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I just—" A pause. "I like that sound." She went still. Not the same way she used to go still around him, not with the careful neutrality she had maintained for years. A different kind of stillness. The kind that came from being exactly where you meant to be. "Merry Christmas, Adrian," she said. "Merry Christmas, Elena." She hung up. She sat in the quiet of her own apartment, the city outside, doing what it always did, regardless of the date, and she felt something she recognized as happiness. Specific, present, uncomplicated, in the way that real things occasionally were when you stopped fighting them. January arrived with the energy of a city that had rested briefly and was done resting. The spring gala planning moved into its final phase. Adrian attended every major decision meeting now, not to control, not to override, but because he was genuinely interested, which turned out to be a version of him she found she liked enormously. He had opinions. He expressed them clearly. And he had, over the course of these months, developed the ability to express them and then step back when she had a stronger read on the situation, to trust her professional judgment, the way he trusted his own in the rooms where he was the authority. "You deferred to me on the stage layout," she said one afternoon, after a particularly productive meeting. "You were right about the sightlines. You had a strong opinion 40 minutes ago, and then you explained your reasoning and I updated my view." He looked at her. "Is that surprising?" "From you, a little." He considered that. "I've been thinking about what my father taught me, about holding things tightly." She waited. "I wasn't wrong that things needed protecting," Adrian said. "He was wrong about what protecting looked like. He thought it meant control. I spent 20 years thinking the same thing." He looked at his hands briefly. "Control isn't care. I know that now. I'm still learning what care actually looks like in practice." "You're doing better than you think," she said. "I have a demanding teacher." She met his eyes. "You do." He held her gaze for a moment, warm, steady, certain. "Worth it," he said. The evening that changed the temperature of everything. The evening that moved something from possible to permanent, arrived without announcement on a Friday in late January. Elena had finished a long week. She was at Adrian's apartment, which had become an ordinary thing by then, the way it happened when two people stopped performing around each other and simply began to exist in each other's spaces. She was on the couch with a file she was reviewing. He was across the room on a call business, the kind she didn't ask the details of, and he had stopped trying to hide the general shape of because honesty between them had become the operating language, and pretending large portions of his life didn't exist was not honest. The call ended. He crossed the room and sat beside her. "Can I tell you something?" he said. She set the file down. "Go ahead." "I spoke with someone this week," he said, "about stepping back from certain parts of the operation. Not immediately, gradually, over a period of time." He looked at her carefully. "Not because you asked me to. You haven't asked me to. But because I've been thinking about what I'm building, and whether the structure is actually what I want it to be." She was very still. "This is not a small thing," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." "And you're sure?" "I've been thinking about it for 3 months. Yes." She looked at him. This man who had built an empire from the belief that power was protection, who was sitting beside her, telling her he was choosing to dismantle portions of that belief because the structure no longer matched what he wanted his life to hold. "I need you to understand something," she said. "Tell me. I'm not the reason for that decision. I can't be the reason. If it's about me, if you're doing this to hold on to me, it won't survive. Because I'll feel the weight of it eventually, and it'll change what's between us." He nodded. "I know. Oh. So tell me again why." I was quiet for a moment. Then, because I looked at what I'd built, and I realized that most of it was fear dressed up as power. Fear of losing control. Fear of being the person I was before I became someone everyone was afraid of. He met her eyes. "I don't want to be that person anymore. Not for you. For myself. Because I've seen in the last few months what it feels like to be a person instead of a position. And I'd like to keep feeling that." The room was very quiet. She reached over and took his hand. He looked down at it, then back at her. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay, I believe you." She held his gaze. "And okay, whatever comes next. We figure it out." He turned his hand and held hers steadily, without the careful restraint he had initially brought to every physical moment between them, just firmly and honestly, the way you held on to something you intended to keep. "I should tell you something too," she said. "Tell me. I talked to Claire last week, my sister." She paused. "She asked me if I was happy." "What did you say?" "I told her I was getting there." She looked at him. "I'm there." He was silent for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Good." It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It wasn't a speech. It was just a word, but from Adrian Voss, a man who had spent his entire life choosing strategic language over emotional truth. That single word carried everything. Good. As in, this is what I wanted. This is what I have been working toward. This is the thing I was afraid I had lost before I understood I was losing it. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Outside Manhattan. Did what Manhattan always did. It moved, it rang. It carried the weight of 8 million lives going simultaneously in every possible direction. Indifferent to any one of them. Enormous and electric and entirely without patience for small, quiet, enormously significant moments happening in the apartments stacked up inside it. Inside, two people sat in the kind of silence that meant nothing needed to be said. Months later, spring, the gala season arrived, and the city dressed itself up the way it did. Every year people began to notice things about Adrian Voss that they couldn't quite name, but couldn't ignore either. He was still powerful. That hadn't changed and wasn't going to. He still walked into rooms and rearranged them without appearing to try. He still made decisions with the efficiency of someone who never second-guessed himself once the information was in. He still commanded the kind of attention that came from genuine authority, not performance. But something underneath was different. He was patient in ways he hadn't been. He listened in rooms where he used to speak, He delegated with a completeness that surprised people who had watched him maintain absolute control over every detail for years. His team noticed it first. Marcus, who had worked for him for 7 years, said to his wife one evening, "Something changed with him. Not his effectiveness, he's as sharp as he's ever been. But he's lighter. Like something he was carrying got put down." His rivals noticed it differently, with a confusion that came from expecting a weakness and not finding one. Adrian Voss had become somehow harder to read. Not because he was more closed, but because the anger that used to drive his decisions had been replaced by something calmer and less predictable. Calm was harder to anticipate than anger. Calm didn't have the patterns fear followed. And Elena noticed it, the way you notice things about a person you watched every day. Not in dramatic shifts, but in the accumulation of ordinary moments. The way he asked questions at the end of conversations now, instead of always beginning with them. The way he called Camille every Sunday, which Camille had mentioned once, with barely concealed delight. The way he had, over the course of 4 months, learned her coffee order, her Sunday routine, the titles of the terrible reality shows she watched, and would never admit to, in a professional context, the specific way she needed quiet for the first 20 minutes after a difficult workday. Small things. The ones that added up to a life. The Spring Gala was by every measurable standard the finest event the Voss Foundation had ever produced. The concept Elena had championed, centering the visual narrative on the people the foundation served rather than the donors who funded it, had translated into something that moved people in a way the polished donor-facing events of previous years hadn't. People cried at a charity gala. Actual tears. Not from manipulation. From recognition. From seeing themselves or someone they loved reflected in the story the room told. Elena stood at the back of the space near the end of the night watching it, and she felt the particular fullness of work that had been done exactly right. Adrian appeared beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. They stood together and watched the room, her design, the story she had fought to tell in a space that had once belonged to his world and had been expanded by the collaboration between them. "You changed it," he said finally. She glanced at him. "Changed what?" "What this foundation looks like from the inside." He was looking at the room, not at her. "What it does, why it does it." He turned to her then. "You changed what I thought I was building." She held his gaze. "What do you mean?" "I built this foundation because it was a good tax structure and a good public face, and it made strategic sense." He said it plainly, without apology for the honesty. "And somewhere because of you, because of what you brought into it, it became something else, something that actually meant what it said." She didn't look away. "Is that all right?" she asked. He looked at her, the way he had been looking at her for months now, with the full weight of his attention, undiluted, the gaze of a man who had stopped managing his feelings about this person and had simply let himself feel them. "It's the best thing I've built," he said. The room moved around them. The spring gala wound down in the graceful, gradual way of evenings that have landed well. People staying longer than they planned, not wanting to break the thing that had been made. Elena's team moved in their quiet, efficient rhythm. Nathan had sent flowers to the office that morning with a note, "Make it extraordinary." She had thought of him briefly and warmly when she read the congratulations messages that came in through the evening. At the end of the night, when the last guest had left and her team was deep in the logistics of teardown, Adrian found her in the corridor outside the main hall. "Go home," he said. "Your team has this. I don't leave before they do." "Elena." "Adrian." He looked at her. She looked at him. "I'll leave when it's done," she said. "I always do." He understood. He had watched her enough times to understand. So instead of arguing, he sat in a chair near the back of the hall and answered messages and let her finish the way she always finished, completely, and without shortcuts, the way she approached everything that mattered to her. When the last vendor signed out and her team had wrapped for the night, she came to find him. "Done," she said. He stood. "Good." They walked out together into the spring air, warmer now, the city, carrying the particular electricity of a season that had finally arrived, and she felt the weight of the evening settling into the pleasant exhaustion of work completed. On the sidewalk, he stopped. She stopped with him. He turned to face her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You're going to ask it either way." Something moved across his face, that expression she had come to love, the one that was almost a smile. The one that was more honest than a smile, because it was quieter. "That night," he said, "at the charity gala, when you laughed." She waited. "I was terrified," he said. "I didn't know that's what it was. I told myself it was anger, told myself it was about control, told myself it was about you being at my event and laughing with someone who wasn't me." He met her eyes. But it was just fear. Simple, ordinary human fear. The kind I had spent 20 years training myself not to feel. "I know," she said. "I needed you to know that's what it was. Not jealousy, not possessiveness." He paused. Just a man realizing he was about to lose something that mattered more than anything he'd spent his life protecting. She looked at him for a long moment. This man. Complicated, genuinely changed, still changing, worth every difficult conversation and every moment of hard clarity and every choice she had made to stay in this and fight for it. "You didn't lose me," she said. "No," he said. "I didn't. You found me," she said. "Eventually." He reached up and took her face in his hands carefully, the way he held things now, and he kissed her the way she had been waiting, without quite admitting it, for him to kiss her. Without strategy, without management, without the careful distance he had always maintained. Just honestly. Just completely. Just like a man who finally understood the difference between holding on and letting someone choose to stay. She put her hands over his, and she kissed him back with everything she had decided over 6 months of watching him learn and choosing to believe it was real. The city moved around them. It always did. Enormous and indifferent and full of stories going in every direction at once. But this one, this specific, difficult, luminous story, had found its ending. Not in the way fairy tales ended, with everything resolved and the danger gone and the world made simple. In the way real things ended, with two imperfect people standing on a sidewalk in the spring air, having fought their way through every hard and necessary thing, choosing each other with full knowledge of what that choice cost and what it was worth. Because the greatest thing the most dangerous man in the city had ever done was not building his empire. It was learning slowly, stubbornly, imperfectly, and completely that the woman he loved had never wanted his empire at all. She had wanted him. And the night another man made her laugh had not been the night he lost her. It had been the night